Welcome everyone to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I'm one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Hey there, Cammy.
Hey, Bryant.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Happy
You too.
June, right?
Yeah, June. It's Pride Month.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's right. Holy cow. Well, what a great way to celebrate Pride Month by talking about the satyr, the horniest being in the Greek and lexicon, right? That's fitting, right?
Yeah, the satyr does have horns, yes.
Yes. So 3. And that's what we talk about here on Mythstorie. Not horny beings. Sometimes we do, but myths and legends and topics throughout time we like to grab. Recently we just did the dwarfs, was really fun. That was an etymological rabbit hole, and we've done things like centaurs recently as well. And kind of a follow-up, we had finished centaur and we were like, let's do those other guys that are like centaurs. And it's actually pretty interesting how similar they are, other than just being half man half animal. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the satyr, Satyr-ical, thanks to theoi.com.
The fawn in Latin.
Correct. Mm-hmm. So we'll hit it like we always do. Cammy's got a story for us, and then after her story, I'll go lead a discussion kind of behind some of the history. So Cammy, take us away with your story of the satyr.
Sure. So I used anderson.stu.dk, and this is one of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales that is really not very well known. So I didn't go Greek with this one, but that's I think awesome. It worked out.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah.
In a dusty room, a great-grandmother once used as a parlor to entertain her guests and many grandchildren, there stood an antique glass-paned display. The chest stood to showcase the many trinkets this woman had collected throughout her long life. No trinket more prized than General Hindquarters Headquarters gives orders, front and rear, Sergeant Billy Goatlegs. This figure, so named by her son when he was very small, was not a normal man. Oh sure, his head and arms seemed human enough, but his ears were pointed and tufted with hair, and his legs were covered in fur and shaped like a goat's. Though the room was no longer used for receiving guests, the chest was full of life. There was a little shepherdess, you see, and the satyr was eager to make her his wife. He had asked her grandfather, a short, stout figure formed from fine china, for her hand in marriage. But the shepherdess had found herself in love already, with the little figure only 1/2 inch taller than her, the chimney sweep. But her grandfather insisted on her marrying the satyr, who was carved of mahogany and rich with the gold of a chest which sat beside him. When the satyr asked for her hand, her grandfather nodded in agreement. The shepherdess was frightened to lose her love, so she ran away with the chimney sweep one night when the whole house was sleeping. They climbed down each glass shelf until they made it to the lock and made quick work of opening it. They then climbed to a high shelf on a nearby bookcase and ran across the dresser and swung down a tassel and made it safely to the floor. They ran through the door and took great effort to close it to make sure it was more difficult to chase after them. The door creaked, and her grandfather could be heard shouting after them. After they closed the door, there was a large crack, as if fine china had been dropped on the floor. They both still ran, even though they were worried about the patriarch. They found the chimney, and the two climbed up the sooty brick until they made it to the top and could see the whole wide world before them. But the shepherdess was frightened of the world so big, so she cried on the sweep's shoulder until he agreed to take her back. And when they made their way back to the cabinet, the two saw her grandfather on the floor, his back broken and his head completely off. The shepherdess cried, but the sweep assured her that he would be mended in the morning, and sure enough, the old woman pieced and glued him back together. She put a strong rivet in his neck. So when the satyr asked again for his granddaughter's hand in marriage, the old man could not nod his head in agreement. So the shepherdess and the chimney sweep lived happily ever after through the years until the day they both broke.
Wow. That's a Hans Christian Andersen thing going on?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's reminds really cool. Me of there's some story when I was a little kid of the little, like a cupboard full of little figures or something that fought each other. Yeah.
The Indian in the Cupboard movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And whenever I have a thought while you're reading, I put a finger up to help me remember. And there's a great joke here. I won't be able to make it now though. I'll think of it later. But the satyr, of course, are Greek origin, if not older, and they're infamously shown with phallic imagery, like extreme phallic imagery. And so when you said that the grandpa had a rivet put in his neck, there's a stiff neck joke there we can make between set. It's there. So let me know what you think. Yeah, definitely turn this off if the kids are in the car. Not really. It's funny. The sources I use, theoi.com, we always praise them enough. Theoi.com, theoi.com, one of the best sources for like ancient Greek stuff and the Roman equivalents, and also Wikipedia and Edema Online. So I'm gonna hit the etymology part first, because I wanted to know if the word satire was connected to satyr, because they're infamously, or they're very famous for being infamous. They're really like, they're tricksters, they're mischief makers, they're silly, if not way worse. That's me being kind. And there is actually a tiny bit. So it comes from French. It comes to English from French in the late 14th or 15th century, directly from the Latin satyra, satire, poetic medley. Early satura, mixed dish filled with various kinds of fruits, or literally full dish, from the feminine satur, or sated, from the pi root sa, to satisfy. So it was altered in Latin by the influence of the Greek word satyr, which the satyr were known as fauns or fauna in Latin, but there are sources that did also call them satyr. Greek really bled into Latin and vice versa. So, but they did have that name for them. I'll go into that in a minute though, because it's kind of like it's one of those things where it was almost there before the satyr were they're introduced to the Romans. So that's the connection. There is a slight connection there, and I bet you that just the fact of the meaning of the words and things like that helped do that, at least in the modern or early modern era of the late medieval period, that kind of thing. So the satyr, my first one was Phil from Hercules, played by Danny DeVito, and that's a great depiction of it. And I think that really does it well. It's even funny because he actually chases the nymphs, if you remember, in the film, which is what they're always depicted doing.
I always see them as like a chaotic neutral type of figure.
Yeah. Well, they're companions of the gods, Dionysus, Hermes, Hephaestus, Pan, Rhea, and Gaia.
Very much associated with Pan, especially, but also Dionysus.
Pan, Dionysus and Pan are like the ones that it's really big on. And what I'll start with too is really the early stuff. So art, of course, is where we get a lot of the mentioning of it all, going back to the 8th century BCE and beyond. As well as they were talked about in the Homeric myth or hymns. All the sources we've mentioned before that were new to us a year ago, and now we're like, oh yeah, Hesiod, what's up, dude? Theoi has shown me that all those guys, and then going into the Ovid, Virgil, Cicero, even, and there's even a cool Byzantine reference in the 10th century AD that was called the Suda. It was like a 10th century Byzantine encyclopedia of the ancient Mediterranean world. So it was like these 10th century Byzantines were like, hey, remember a long time ago our people, let's write it down. So and then they show up there in the way that we kind of know it now. So the satyr, what Theoi and Wikipedia kind of describe though is it is distinctly Greek, but there's some theories that this goes beyond that. And what's interesting too, there's actually a little section in Wikipedia that William Hansen is this classicist who says that there's not many surviving mythological accounts of the satyr. Like they're in the art and they're kind of like a being, but it's not like Hercules. There's not like a cult of the myth behind them. Apparently, Theoi does mention there's a lot of satyr individuals that are mentioned in stories, and what's interesting is early satyr are actually more horse-like in a way, but they're bipedal beings, and they usually have the feet of a man, but they have like the ears of a horse. They have tails like horses, but and that's kind of it. Yeah, that's really it. I'm looking at a 5th century BC dancing satyr that's in the British Museum. It's a like a vase thing, and it's a dude with a horse tail, and then kind of like longer ears, and no pants, and that's it. The goat stuff kind of came later, but there's, so it's kind of weird. Like the satyr,
Do
they
you think that
weren't
was
like,
because of Pan or something else?
I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to say. I mean, there's a there's enough of them, and they're kind of brought in. But the big thing that kind of brought them into the limelight was satyr plays, which was a type of play, which was almost like a satire play. Like it was like funny versions of plays, and it, from what it sounds like
That's like Puck from
Midsummer
Night's
Night's
Dream.
Dreams. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he turns into an ass, and that's the features are very asinine. That's the word Wikipedia uses. They say equine or asinine, and it's very asinine, which that's where that word comes from. And that's what Puck, his whole face turns into a dog. I think his face and hands, he gets hooves in the end. And yeah, but so in that archaic and Greek classical art, they're shown with the ears and tails of horses. The satyr plays are the written sources that we kind of have, but it seems like I guess it's kind of hard to say just without having like a big academic background in this what like this classicist means. But like I'll kind of read a little bit off of what Wikipedia says. So different classical sources present conflicting accounts of their origins. The classical Greeks recognized the satyrs obviously could not self-reproduce since there were no female satyrs mentioned, but they seem to be unsure whether satyrs were mortal or immortal. This kind of reminds us of the centaur. The first centaur, Chiron, who was born out of a kind of like a godly event, he didn't make more. It was weird. A cloud made more. Listen to that episode. It was really fun.
So it's funny that you say that. So I called Candace a satyr, and she was like, "Wait, but aren't satyrs all boys?" And I was like, "No. Like in Roman mythology, like there's the faunus and the fauna. And it was like a male and female." And I was like, "Here, I'll find a picture." And like the only picture that I could find, the only depiction was a female satyr who had stolen 2 babies and was like running away with them.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It was so funny.
Jeez. It's funny you say that because you've probably heard of, it's not used really anymore, nymphomania, which is more hypersexuality is the term that's used now. Well, nymphomania is the previous term for women. What would the male term be? Satyr-ical. Satyr-ical. So that just kind of shows you like the masculine feminine form of hypersexuality. It was nymphomania and satyr-ical, even though it was really the satyrs that were yeah, I don't know. Anyway, another kind of origin here that I like, it kind of goes to and I'll point Theoi and Wikipedia mention that these are Theoi, I'll quote, says that the Satyroi were rustic fertility spirits of the countryside and wilds. And so Wikipedia also mentions that they're nature spirits, and there's a section on Roman nature spirits. And I remember I read the book, or part of it. It was quite long. A book called Roma. It is by Stephen Saylor. And it's really long. It's really good. I listened to the first few hours on an audiobook, and it's kind of like he wants to tell the founding of Rome as if it were happening. And they talk about the noumena, which are these spirits of the land. Like there's the noumena of the river and the noumena of the dirt, and that's what this is sort of. And there's also there is a story of how Jupiter Ovid wrote that Jupiter, the king of the gods, expresses worry that the viciousness of humans will leave fauns, nymphs, and satyrs without a place to live. So he gives them a home in the forest, woodlands, and mountains where they will be safe. So there's this kind of, Ovid kind of gives them a reason of why they're wild beings. Because that's very much, satyr is very much a wild man sort of spirit. And so it was really interesting to kind of see how that goes. But it seems to derive from a nature spirit concept, and that's what Wikipedia sort of further goes. They talk about in other countries, there's the wild man is sort of it. There's in Asia and the Balkans and in ancient Britain, there's these half man being, half man and half animal beings, nothing as distinct as a centaur, and nothing that's necessarily named anything other than like wild man or something like that. It's funny too, Pliny the Elder actually, he conflated satyrs to gibbons, which he described using the word satyrus, a Latinized form of satyros. So like, like people bringing this, like the science into it. I really love that. But yeah, so the Roman nature spirit, they identified satyrs with their own nature spirits, the faun. So it seemed like the faun kind of existed before, and they went, oh yeah, the satyr, as they're being introduced to the Greek culture, that's the fauns. So they kind of put that together. And Phil, like I mentioned from Hercules, I wrote my notes, he really looks like the fauns that are depicted in the art from the last 100 years, starting in like the 15th and 16th century. That's when the art really took the turn of the very distinctive look. Basic, like I said, just Phil from Hercules. That's what the modern satyr work looks like, and that comes from the medieval art, the Renaissance reappearance, and then early modern period is where it comes from. There's some interesting stuff too behind the etymology. The word Satyr, S-A''ir, is a Hebrew word, an old Hebrew word that means goat man. I think I had it as. And so there's some ideas there, and it was used in a Latin translation of the Bible. They actually used the word satyr. I think it was a 10th century Latin translation.
Oh yeah, there are mentions of satyrs in like biblical texts,
right? And that comes, what we believe that comes. They wanted to, the satyr was such a known idea, and as a wild, evil, crazy person at a moderate chance. But so I don't know. It's kind of like a coincidence that it sounds extremely similar, as well as describes like a hairy evil thing. And it makes me think of like the demonic symbols of Satan with the goat head and things like that.
He's always depicted, or not always, but he's often depicted with a goat's head and hoof, like cloven hooves.
Right.
Even that story that Debbie told us with the devil coming to play cards in Ireland.
That's right. Yeah.
Cloven hooves.
And it looks like that kind of came during the Christian Renaissance, the Christian that influenced Renaissance, where angels went from like omnipotent 5-eyed 8-winged balls of flesh to pretty people. So I think there may be a correlation there. I'll note fauns. There's a big difference between the fauns and the satyr. The fauns are almost always depicted as being very innocent and Bambi, while the satyr have they have a wisdom, is what Wikipedia says, hidden. They kind of are rustic and wise and horny. So
like
there's
Pan from Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah. So but the fauns always have this distinct kind of innocence to them, and there's a lot of art where they really are like very Cupid like, where it's like a baby goat, but they're not babies. They're doing their thing, whatever they got to do, faun stuff. So yeah, I really enjoyed looking into this because it's got a lot more to it. He-goat, Satyr, he-goat. I found my little note that I had on it. The nature spirits is the big sort of thing here. Human animal hybrids of equine or asinine features. It's actually old Sanskrit stories include this. Again, the British Islands, the Balkans, there's records of similar animals. Satyr, the he-goat. that Latin Vulgate translation of the Old Testament is where we get that from. So there's some really interesting stuff there. Also, satyrs were also a word used to compare jinn of pre-Islamic Arabia. So that was another translation. It seemed like it was like, because jinn don't always have to be like demons, but they can be mischievous beings. It's almost like yokai in Japan. A yokai can be like, oh, I have a itch on my back, or oh, I'm dying. That's that's the spectrum of yokai, and that's the spectrum of jinn. But so the satyr, they've been used to fill that spectrum in translations as this wild, crazy thing. Although they don't seem to be super malicious to humans in the stories. But again, there's a lot of stories on satyr. There's a lot of individuals. Like centaur, we have Chiron. That's it. Satyrs, there's a lot. There's specific guys that are specific companions to people like Pan and Dionysus and things like that. So really fun little story there, though, Cammy. I enjoyed hearing that, and it's amazing to see Hans Christian Andersen write something like that, because there was a revival of the Greek stuff, and these beings were really interesting. So it worked out really well. So great job as always.
Thank you. You as well.
So I think that covers it for today, everyone. We hope you enjoyed our Satyr-ical discussion. Do you like that? That's what I'm naming the episode. I don't. Okay. I gotta try and find a thumbnail that's not gonna just have a giant phallus. There, it's gonna be difficult because I was like on the Theoi website, and I was scrolling, and I had to like back out because I could not have that talk with Kinley right now about. There was. I'll just add. There's one where a satyr is literally balancing a huge wine goblet on his phallic being.
That's the thing. They would like just get drunk, and it was a bunch of revelry, and they would invite the cult of Bacchus over, and those ladies would celebrate with them, and Bacchus would come down. And
it was good times back then.
Yeah.
Where did it all go, Cammy? Where did we go wrong?
Capitalism.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us. And remember, you can reach out to us, mythstorie@gmail.com. Check out the link tree in the description below for all of our social media and things like that. Let us know if you have any topics you'd like us to discuss. I think that's it. Cammy, thanks again.
Good.
All right, everyone. We will see you next time.
Oh.